Okay, I'm going to talk about now what it's like to to follow God, what it's really like to trust God, and what would you experience when you're attempting to trust God and follow, have Him lead you forward. It's a feeling that's very scary at first, terrifying in fact, because trust God. When you start to actually have an opportunity to trust God and He's going to lead you somewhere, you have not done it before, and certainly the presence that you're feeling, if it's God, will be a presence of power, and ultimately the natural reaction is to fear it, and also not to fear it, because the bravery of some men when they meet the powers of God or when they stand before them or next to them are honored by the presence of God and also empowered by the presence of God, so that when a man is approached by God and it's real, that man will either cower in fear and bow down, get down on his knees to capitulate to the presence of the power of the great God. And God's not going to be mad at any man who bows down and gets on his knees and drops everything for God in respect, with dignity, but it's not with dignity. So if God came to you, you would have a choice to stand up and hold your own before God, or drop it all and bow down and get down on your knees and praise and worship Him. If you are a man that stands up to God, face Him, you don't get on your knees, and when He comes around, you are empowered by His presence. So His presence coming to you is an empowerment, and it makes you stronger and stand up harder. So ultimately, if God came and approached you, it would either make you stronger or basically kill you. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. If God doesn't come around and kill you because His presence literally takes your presence out, then it'll empower your presence. And in fact, you'll need that presence, His presence, to empower, to keep yourself strong. Now, what happened is George Armstrong Custer was a man who got his horses shot out from him often in battle in the Civil War. And George was a man who charged into battle, and he drank alcohol. So what? He usually had some type of alcohol on him, but he often fought battles not really drunk, but definitely intoxicated. He did it often with the alcohol. He drank a lot. So he had issues because being kind of loaded and as a general or fighting, he was also fearless. And ultimately, the alcohol could help a little bit, but he was fearless because of his God with him, not because of the alcohol. Certainly, he drank not to help him be brave, which people do drink to help them be brave. In fact, many men will need to drink just to be able to fight on the battlefield. Custer drank too, but it wasn't to keep him brave because he was fearless and he had his God before him. He also liked to drink because it just made it easier and empowered him. And ultimately, Custer would follow his God wherever he leaded him. If God said charge, Custer charged on with his cavalry, and he did it all the time. So the horses that were shot out from underneath him, it happened many times that he literally got the horses shot under him, shot out from underneath them, killed. The horses would be killed. He'd fall on the ground. And he never got shot. So he avoided bullets that on the battlefield in the Civil War. He avoided getting shot and fighting, charging into battle and in the front of the whole thing. And when his horses were shot out underneath him several times, and they couldn't believe he didn't die. So people watched Custer fight in the Civil War in the cavalry units and thought like, man, that guy, he should be dead, man. Like he's like insane. He'll charge into battle like he's a dumbass. Like he doesn't even care if he gets shot. And ultimately, that was exactly how Custer fought and acted. He did not care if he got shot. Utterly did not care if those bullets think they're coming at me, they're not. And ultimately, the people who looked at him and said, like, he is either insane or he's drunk or he's a hero or he's God or what the hell, man. And ultimately, Custer liked the attention he got because people were observing Custer's behavior, and he did not die in the battlefield. And it's because he was following his God. Understand that Custer was with his God on the battlefield, and his God said, "You will not die, and I shall not let a bullet touch you." Now he didn't actually hear his God say that. What I'm telling you is God told me that He told Custer that in his feelings. So Custer didn't hear God say that to him. He felt that he was invincible because God did make him feel like that. Like, don't think bullets will touch you. They can't. Ultimately, he got that feeling that bullets won't touch me. They can't. Now, when you think about that, like a perfectly sane man like Custer, who's a general, a very young one, a fighter and a man, believed that his feelings, just believed his feelings that said, I'm invincible. He must have known he's not invincible. He must have known that like just because he feels invincible doesn't warrant being insane and charging into battle, like, and not worrying about the bullets hitting him. He did not worry about the bullets hitting him. He thought God would protect him, and he believed God that there was no bullet that will touch me. And he acted in the manner of what that represented in the field. He acted like he certainly would be dead. He certainly couldn't last more than a few battles. And the way he fought, it was like he was asking to die, because there was no way that he could have really done what he did in the Civil War without him having help of some kind. Understand, what they saw was Custer is somehow able to utterly put himself in the worst danger and ultimately escape death. Time after time, he did it in the Civil War, and they observed that he did it. And they didn't know how it could happen that he got that lucky, but they did say that he was that lucky. So Custer was thought to be the luckiest man around. And when they made him a general, he was the youngest general that ever existed. He was 23 years old. He became a general. He also got demoted. They took that generalship away from him, which really hurt him. Custer, at the Little Bighorn, was doing just what he was doing all the wars before. But what would kill him was not that he followed his God into battle, but he followed his God into battle like every time before at the Little Bighorn. And the only difference between the Little Bighorn and all the other battles before that he never died in and could never die in was that the Battle of Little Bighorn, God wanted him to die, and God would kill him, basically. So at the Battle of Little Bighorn, Custer was led into a death trap by God. And ultimately, God says it could have been Libby, his wife, that led him into that death trap. And maybe I was trying to warn him and tell him not to go in there. So understand that Custer was following in his head some kind of energy that was God, or his God, that made him feel invincible. He was also in contact and dealing with an energy that was from his wife. It was a feminine energy. I'll tell you, it was from the Divine Feminine Collective. So basically, Custer only really accepted one person in his life as where he would drop his shields and completely be innocent. So Custer was a strong man with a strong will and didn't drop his shields. So he was always self-possessed and empowered at all times, never letting his guard down. Now, he did only make one huge mistake, which got him killed, is that God told me that Libby, his wife, was the divine feminine presence that he loved, like kind of like the goddess presence. And he was in love with her, his wife, and she thought he was a hero, general, God. So basically, he loved the way she treated him. My wife thinks I'm a hero, and maybe I am. And ultimately, she was also trying to lead him around, tell him what to do, giving her feminine advice. And Custer would drop his will and all his power just for his wife to love her. He did that so awesome. Wait a minute. Are you saying that Custer dropped this power and dropped it like it was this hot potato? Didn't know. Custer would give his wife so much love and respect when he was with her that he would drop his own power like a hot potato and be in love with her like a boy, like a little boy. And he didn't mind because he's a man. And he said, I don't need my power in front of my wife. I don't need to be a general empowered with a strong will, and I'm not killing my wife or fighting her. So like the way he was with all the people in the world, and as he behaved next to every person that he ever saw or was around, Custer was always the same way. He was a general, a tough guy, like maybe a god. He certainly was a crazy hero that was like impervious to death and invincible because he proved it time after time, and no one could explain how he could live through all the things that happened to him. He certainly should have been dead. So his reputation preceded him, and ultimately he loved it. When he went into battle at Little Bighorn, he followed his wife into battle that day. It was the only time that he had decided to do it, because understand that day at Little Bighorn, he would be led into the battle by the divine feminine, his wife's presence, and he would have dropped his hot potato God that was invincible and impervious. He ultimately started following the energy of the divine feminine that one day instead of the divine masculine only. So he did something that got him killed. He followed her, and she led him into a total death trap. Understand why she did it? Because the divine feminine saw Custer as a divine masculine presence, which was ultimately rejecting the divine feminine presence, so wrong, and also was a warring kind of man who killed and murdered. And the divine feminine would say that that man is leading the divine masculines, and the presence of all men are going to want to be like him, and everyone wants to be like Custer and a hero and reject the divine feminine and be against women. And Custer needs to die. And ultimately, that literally was something that only was happening at the Little Bighorn, because Custer didn't need to die. In fact, she couldn't do anything to him until that last battle when he did die. So what happened to Custer that actually made it so he actually was a victim of the divine feminine? He did that for her. What did he do? He dropped this power like a hot potato. He picked up that power, and that is all he had was his wife. And she let him. She said, "Good, you're doing it right. Take that from me." And he did it like a little boy that now had no general hero in him whatsoever. And he only did it that one time for her. And there was a reason why he did it, because he was supposed to die. So understand what really happened. The way I just explained it to you is the way that it really happened according to the way I could observe it. But if I actually had God telling me right here, sitting here with me, he could actually say, that's not exactly the way it happened. I withdrew my presence from Custer that day during that battle, right before that battle. God, took my presence away from him. I withdrew myself from Custer, and all that was left in him was the divine feminine and his wife's energy or spirit. So he lost his God that day. It was why he died. Now, why did God make Custer a hero, impervious and invincible, and give him such a great reputation? Do you know that Custer, Libby got the table that the Confederates surrendered on, the table that General Lee had to surrender and sit on and surrender on, sign all the papers? Well, that table was given to Libby after Custer's death, and she was basically a celebrity after he died. She was traveling around talking and doing all kinds of important stuff because Libby was a hero and like a movie star after Custer died. Before he died, she was just a wife at home, and she wasn't getting any attention. It was all going to him. Custer would die at Little Bighorn because God would basically withdraw his presence from him, and Custer did not have what he always had to keep him alive and absolutely invincible. His God was not with him. When the battle started, Custer was alone with the divine feminine presence in his head, mom, and then God was gone. Now, you could look at that as a betrayal. Like, God left me. All the power and possibility left me. So I was basically left in battle, and plus outnumbered like he was. He was completely outnumbered. He certainly should have retreated and got the hell out of there. But he was Custer. He don't retreat. So he won't run. He's going to attack. And ultimately, because his behavior is fighting with his God, well, understand it works. And so if he attacks, he would take out the entire Indian nation single-handedly if it was God with him. Understand that. That if God stayed in him, he would have had to attack. He would have attacked. An Indian nation that was 10,000 strong and with his 200 men, he would have won. Understand, if God was with him, he couldn't lose, and God would have massacred the Indians anyways. So understand, whatever happened, that God knew this, that if he's about to go into battle and try to slaughter 10,000 Indians with his 200 men, well, he is now doing something that I don't want to be doing. And ultimately, God said, if you go in there, you're following her, and I won't be with you when you're fighting the battle at Little Bighorn. And when Custer realized that, he was in the battle, dispossessed of God, and basically suddenly realized he has no power. He's not invincible. Those bullets are coming at him. And ultimately, he absolutely was killed on that field. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how he was killed and what happened to him. Hmm. Okay. Custer was on the battlefield, and he was shot a couple times, but he got shot finally, and he was bleeding out, and he lost enough blood where he got weak, and also he lost his sight in his eyes. Um, So what Custer experienced right before he died was he had his horse dead before him. They had either shot the horses or the horses got shot. So there were no horses that were standing up. All the horses were scattered dead on the battlefield, and they were using those horses for cover. So they were fighting behind horses, and Custer got hit a couple times, and I don't know where in the torso or whatever. He's bleeding out. Slowly, he's losing blood until he's sitting there alive, and he's losing his eyesight. So he can't see anymore. The first thing he does, sitting there, and he's sitting there, and the Indians are approaching and surrounding him. Basically, he's realizing that this could be over with, especially when his eyesight starts to go red. He can't see anymore. So he's now blinded by loss of blood or his wounds, and he's trying to see, and he can hear though. So he spends about 15 minutes listening to the sound of the guns pop, 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 while he's blinded and can't see anything. He's sitting on the ground next to his horse, and the Indians are approaching slowly, shooting from all directions. And basically, his men are dying, getting shot all around him. He's already shot, and now he can't see. He can only hear. During the time that Custer was alive still on that ground was about 15 minutes. And he could only hear, and he was listening intently with his ears, focusing on the sound, because he certainly couldn't use his eyes anymore. And so he was on his back on the ground now, looking up at the sky, blinded, and just only listening to the shots. When the Indians approached Custer, he could not see who was approaching him, blinded, and he did hear them come up to him. And the Indians immediately, when they found Custer, they immediately put him on the ground. He was perfectly alive and conscious, and still, but he was blind. And ultimately, they took some kind of a stick or something, and they poked his ears out. Now, the Indians, while he's still alive, they punctured his eardrums. So they stuck things in his ears while he was alive, and they were telling him, while they were doing it to him, that you will listen in the other next lifetime, General. You're going to listen to us, and so the next lifetime, we're going to poke your eardrums out with sticks, so that your ears will be open to listen to the truth when it comes to you next time, since you won't do it this time. And ultimately, the Indians thought they were doing something to Custer to help him in the afterlife. With his ears punctured, he might be able to hear whatever he was deaf to before. So when they punctured his ears, now he was fully blind and now deaf and still alive. So it was very traumatic for him. Even as a brave general, when you experience blindness and deafness while you're still perfectly conscious, well, then, yeah, and you could only feel people around you, and now you're helpless, completely helpless. Custer got to that state and then basically died. He bled out finally. They buried him or whatever they did with his body, and wow. It's just a shame that he would have been killed for a certain reason. I understand that Custer was a hero that was drinking a lot of alcohol, and he would drink a lot of alcohol, and God told him when he started getting near the battle, bighorn started coming around. It's going to come up pretty soon, and God was telling him, you got to quit drinking because your liver can't handle it. Now, the way God spoke to Custer was through his feelings. So Custer didn't have a relationship with God based upon like he could see him or hear his voice. So the way that Custer kind of talked to his God was through how he felt like, yeah, God's with me. I mean, I just know it, and I'm empowered. Yeah. So God would tell him that you have to quit drinking. And so Custer would drink, and then God would be telling him why he's drinking. You can't keep drinking. So Custer would drink sometimes and sit there and with the alcohol and feel like depressed and kind of bad. And he'd be like a guy that you said, what's wrong? If you look like you're lost, dude, he'd be drinking and saying, I don't know, I feel good today, man. It doesn't feel right. Ultimately, God's telling him you can't keep drinking. Your liver can't handle it. So he drank a bunch of times like that. By God told him while he was drinking, just sat there and talked to him in his feelings and said, you're going to die. If you keep drinking, your liver won't handle it. You've got to quit. And then you could continue to live many more years as a sober general. And you need to sober up if you're going to survive. And ultimately, because he didn't actually hear God telling him that, he only felt it. And he had to interpret, I don't know what's going on, man, but I feel like I better quit drinking and I'm feeling sick. Well, yeah, maybe your liver's all screwed up, but like, who's going to tell him that? When the Battle of Little Bighorn got there, God knew he wasn't going to quit drinking. Custer knew he wasn't going to quit drinking, and he definitely made it pretty clear that alcohol was going to be a part of his life until his death. Unfortunately, because whatever Custer decided to do was to basically, for the first time, slough off God's will because he never did it before. Meaning, anything God had told him to do, he did, and anything God wanted him to do, he wanted to do. There was nothing that God had told him before to do or not do that he didn't want to also do or not do because his will was in alignment with God's. But when God told him, now you got to quit drinking, I'm trying to save your liver, man. You've got to quit drinking. And ultimately, God would say it was great if you could continue to drink. But the thing is that your liver can't take it. And ultimately, it was now God's will that he quit drinking. And his will was suddenly now not in alignment with God's because he was thinking, I don't really want to quit drinking. I'm not really sure my liver's that bad. I don't even know you're telling me anything now, anyways. So Custer didn't have God there literally to tell him, even when God literally did tell him there. Custer couldn't authenticate that God was with him. He certainly what God was with him, and ultimately the way he related to his God was blind and by faith. And ultimately, it was not good enough. It certainly would be that he would dismiss the idea that he really has to be sober and quit drinking because he certainly didn't actually know that God was sitting there next to him telling him that. He certainly felt it when God was doing it, telling him that, sitting there. He felt it. He even might have thought about it. I wonder if God's telling me that and sitting here with me. Thing is that after he's done with this little fantasy in his head about sitting with God, he's basically just going to get up and be a man and do what he wants. And it's like whatever that was, it was a little bit of fantasy in my mind. And so he didn't really obey God like he should. And when the wheels went out of alignment, okay, that's it.